On October 25th, 1999, a private jet took off from Orlando International Airport on what looked like the most ordinary morning in the world. The sky was clear, the weather was perfect. The flight plan was simple: Orlando to Dallas, 2.5 hours. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, just 6 people on a routine business trip. But 14 minutes after that jet left the ground, something happened inside that aircraft that nobody on the outside could see, nobody could fix, and nobody could stop. And for the next 4 hours, that plane flew on by itself, crossing over 6 American states, covering 1,400 miles of open sky, while the people inside were already beyond safe. This is not a story about a crash. This is a story about a ghost, a real ghost. A ghost that flew through the heart of America in broad daylight, while millions of people watched on live television and could do absolutely nothing. Payne Stewart was not just a golfer. In America, Payne Stewart was a symbol. He was the man with the +4s, the knickerbockers, the trademark Tam Oyo Shanter cap, and a smile that made you feel like everything in the world was going to be just fine. He had won 11 PGA Tour events in his career. He had won 3 major championships, including the 1989 PGA Championship and the US Open in both 1991 and 1999. That 1999 US Open victory at Pinehurst was one of the most emotional moments in the history of American sport. On the final hole, needing to sink a 15-foot putt to win, Payne Stewart did exactly that. And when the ball dropped, he threw his fist into the air, fell to his knees, and wept. The entire country watched that moment. The entire country felt it. He was 42 years old. He was at the absolute peak of his life. He had just signed a new management deal. He was planning his future. He was flying to Dallas that morning to look at a golf course development project. It was supposed to be a quick trip. He was supposed to be back home by dinner. The aircraft was a Learjet 35, a registered as a 47BA, operated by a Florida-based charter company called Sunjet Aviation. The jet was 23 years old at the time, having first taken flight back in 1976. It had logged over 10,500 flight hours across its lifetime. On board that morning were 6 people total. The 2 pilots were Captain Michael Kling and First Officer Stephanie Belgarigue, both experienced and certified. The 4 passengers were Payne Stewart, his agents Robert Fraley and Van Art, and golf course architect Bruce Borland. The jet was fueled for nearly 5 hours of flight, which was more than enough for a 2.5-hour trip to Dallas. Everything about the departure looked completely normal. At exactly 9:19 in the morning, Eastern Time, and 47, BA rolled down runway 36L at Orlando International Airport and lifted into the blue Florida sky. The autopilot was engaged. The jet climbed smoothly toward its cruising altitude of 39,000 feet. Air traffic controllers in Jacksonville, Florida, were tracking the flight, and everything appeared completely routine. At 9:27 a.m., the cockpit made its last radio transmission. It was a casual, unremarkable response to an instruction from air traffic control. The pilots acknowledged a clearance to climb. Their voices were calm. There was no hint of anything wrong. Nobody on the ground had any reason to be concerned. And then, just like that, the radio went quiet. At 9:33 a.m., air traffic controllers in Jacksonville tried to contact N47BA. No answer. They tried again at 9:34. Nothing. They tried again and again over the next several minutes. The radio stayed completely silent. On the radar screen, the blip representing N47BA was still there, still moving, still climbing. But nobody inside that cockpit was responding. Controllers began to feel the first edges of concern. This was not normal. A professional flight crew does not simply stop responding to radio calls without reason. Something was wrong. The question was, what? By 9:52 a.m., the FAA had issued a formal emergency alert. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, the military organization responsible for protecting American airspace, was officially notified. The decision was made immediately. Scramble fighter jets, get eyes on that aircraft, find out what is happening within minutes. 2. United States Air Force, F-16. Fighting Falcons were launched from Tyndall Air Force Base in the Florida Panhandle. Their mission was straightforward: intercept the Learjet, make visual contact, assess the situation, report back. Those pilots had no idea what they were flying toward. When the first F-16 pilot pulled alongside N47BA and looked through the windows of that Learjet, what he saw stopped his heart. The windows were frosted over, covered in ice on the inside, not on the outside, where ice forms naturally at high altitude from moisture in the air. On the inside, that detail told the F-16 pilot everything he needed to know. When a cabin loses pressurization at 39,000 feet, the temperature inside drops to catastrophic levels almost instantly. Ice forming on the inside of the windows meant one thing and one thing only. The cabin pressure was gone. And if the cabin pressure was gone, at that altitude, the people inside had run out of time a long time ago. He peered harder through the frosted glass. There was no movement, no faces appearing at the windows, no signs of life at all. He radioed back his report. The crew appeared to be incapacitated. The aircraft was flying on autopilot with no human being in control. Back on the ground, that report sent shockwaves through every air traffic control center, every military command, and within the hour, every television network in America. News channels broke into their regular programming. Anchors began reporting live. Radar tracking of N47BA was put on screen for the entire nation to watch. And what America watched in real time was a ghost plane drifting silently northwest across the country, through Georgia, through Tennessee, through Missouri, crossing state after state, flying perfectly level, perfectly stable, the autopilot holding it steady at 39,000 feet. Completely indifferent to the fact that every single person on board was already beyond reach. More fighter jets were scrambled as the plane crossed into new airspace. Pilots from Oklahoma, from Kansas, from the Air National Guard, they took turns flying alongside the ghost plane, shadowing it, watching it, reporting its position. Each pilot who pulled alongside that jet and looked through those frosted windows reported the same thing. No movement, no response, nothing. The military had no options. They could not land the plane remotely. There was no technology in 1999 to take control of an aircraft from the outside. They could not shoot it down over populated areas. All they could do was follow it, watch it, and wait for the inevitable. For 4 hours and nearly 1,400 miles, N47B A flew on through the American sky. The autopilot kept it level, kept it on a heading, kept it flying as if nothing in the world was wrong. Down below, families in 6 different states looked up at a clear October sky, completely unaware that a ghost was passing silently overhead. Payne Stewart, one of the most recognized athletes in America, was up there. So were 5 other human beings, all of them unreachable, all of them gone, and yet the plane kept flying because machines do not know when the people inside them have died. Machines just keep doing what they were told to do. At 12:10 p.m. Central Time, the Learjet's engines began to wind down. The fuel was exhausted. 4 hours and 54 minutes after takeoff, the tanks had run dry. The engines went quiet, and then the autopilot, with no power to sustain it, disconnected. The plane, 39,000 feet above the plains of South Dakota, began to fall. An Air National Guard pilot flying alongside transmitted this report, and these are the actual words used. The target is descending, and he is doing multiple rolls. Looks like he is out of control. Another pilot reported seconds later. It is soon to impact the ground. He is in a descending spiral. At 12:13 p.m. N47, BA struck a field near the town of Mena in Edmonds County, South Dakota, at near supersonic speed and at an almost perfectly vertical angle. The impact left a crater 42 feet long, 21 feet wide, and 8 feet deep. The aircraft was completely destroyed. There was almost nothing left. 6 people gone in an instant. When NTSB investigators arrived at the crash site in South Dakota, they faced one of the most challenging investigations in the agency's history. The impact had been so violent, so complete, so total, that the wreckage yielded almost nothing usable. The Learjet had hit the ground at close to the speed of sound, nearly straight down, and the energy of that impact had essentially vaporized the aircraft. Pieces were scattered across a wide area. Critical components of the pressure and oxygen systems were either destroyed beyond analysis or simply never found. The NTSB had very little physical evidence to work with, and what they did have raised more questions than it answered. The aircraft was not equipped with a flight data recorder. Let that sink in for a moment. A jet carrying a world-famous athlete and 5 other human beings was flying without one of the most important safety tools in modern aviation. The cockpit voice recorder was present, but it only captured the final 30 minutes of the flight, and those final 30 minutes offered no screams, no panic, no calls for help, no emergency transmissions of any kind. Just the ambient sounds of a jet in flight, the mechanical hum of engines, the background noise of the cockpit, and then the sound of the engines winding down as the fuel ran out. Whatever had happened to the crew had happened long before that recorder captured anything meaningful. The critical window, those first minutes after takeoff, when everything went wrong, was simply not recorded. It was gone forever. What investigators did recover told them the broad outline of what had happened, but not the specific cause. The cabin had lost pressurization. That was clear. At 39,000 feet, without a pressurized cabin, the oxygen level available to the human body drops to almost nothing within seconds. The condition that kills in the situation is called hypoxia, which is oxygen deprivation at the cellular level. Hypoxia does not feel like suffocation. That is one of the most dangerous things about it. A person experiencing hypoxia does not feel themselves losing consciousness the way you would if someone held a pillow over your face. Instead, hypoxia feels like warmth, like contentment, like a pleasant drift into sleep. The mind slows down without realizing it is slowing down. Rational thought disappears before the person realizes they have lost it. There is no alarm going off inside the human body, warning you that you are dying. You simply fade, and then you're gone. NTSB expert Dr. Mitchell Garber explained the timeline in his official analysis. If the cabin had depressurized rapidly to the equivalent of 30,000 feet, research shows that a human being has as little as 8 seconds of what is called useful consciousness. 8 seconds. In 8 seconds, a trained pilot is supposed to recognize the problem, reach for their oxygen mask, pull it over their face, secure it, and begin breathing supplemental oxygen. If they do not complete that sequence within 8 seconds, hypoxia will have already impaired their thinking to the point where they can no longer do it. Their hands may reach for the mask. Their fingers may touch it, but their brain can no longer command the sequence of actions needed to put it on correctly. And then it is over. Investigators found that both pilots had their oxygen mask. Hoses connected to the supply lines, the oxygen bottle's regulator and shutoff valve were open. Oxygen was available, the masks were there. Everything was in place, but neither pilot had put their mask on in time. The NTSB concluded that the most likely explanation was that the depressurization was rapid enough that hypoxia overtook the crew before they could complete the masking sequence. In plain language, the air went away so fast that their brain stopped working before their hands could save them. And once that happened, once both pilots were incapacitated, the Learjet was flying itself. The autopilot held its heading, the engines burned their fuel, and 6 people began a 4-hour journey to a South Dakota field with nobody at the controls. But here is where this story becomes more than just a tragedy. Here's where it becomes something that should make every single person who has ever boarded an aircraft stop and think carefully, because the NTSB did not just investigate the final flight. They investigated the entire history of that aircraft. And what they found in the maintenance logs of N47BA was deeply, deeply troubling. On February 9th, 1998, a full 19 months before the crash, a pilot had formally reported that the plane sometimes would not hold cabin pressure at low altitude. That complaint was logged, it was documented. And the problem was not definitively fixed. In July of 1999, just 3 months before Payne Stewart boarded that jet, mechanics were called again to inspect the pressurization system. Again, on October 12th, 1999, just 13 days before the fatal flight, A bleed air leak was found in the tail section of the aircraft and repaired by replacing a gasket. 13 days before 6 people died, a technician was inside that jet, working on the systems that were supposed to keep them alive. The maintenance records showed a pattern, a consistent, documented, undeniable pattern of pressurization issues on the specific aircraft going back years. The company operating the jet, Sunjet Aviation, had poor maintenance documentation practices. Repairs were deferred. Warning signs were not escalated the way they should have been. In the lawsuits that followed, the crash attorneys argued that a cracked valve adapter in the pressurization system was the likely physical cause of the fatal depressurization event. That theory was argued in court for years. But in 2005, a jury cleared Bombardiers, the manufacturer of the Learjet, 35 of liability. The specific mechanical component that failed on the morning of October 25th, 1999, the precise physical cause of why that cabin lost pressure, was never officially confirmed. The NTSB's final report, released in November of 2000, after more than a year of investigation, stated its probable cause in these exact words: incapacitation of the flight crew members as a result of their failure to receive supplemental oxygen following a loss of cabin pressurization for undetermined reasons. For undetermined reasons, those 3 words are the most chilling. 3 words in that entire document. A government agency with the full resources of the United States at its disposal spent over a year investigating this crash. And the best answer they could give the families of 6 dead people was undetermined reasons. NTSB Chairman Jim Hall addressed this directly at the press conference following the release of the final report. He said, and these are his documented words, "The airplane was not equipped with a flight data recorder, an invaluable tool in most major investigations, and it had only a 30-minute cockpit voice recorder." He acknowledged that the severity of the impact had left investigators with almost nothing to work with. He noted that the aircraft hit the ground at near supersonic speed and at an extremely steep angle, leaving nearly none of the plane's components intact. The board could not determine whether the emergency oxygen bottle had been as fully charged as it should have been. They could not determine whether the pilots had lost their capability to act before or after they may have attempted to put on their oxygen masks. The investigation was, in the NTSB's own words, severely hampered by the lack of survivable recorded data and the near total destruction of critical evidence on impact. The crash of N-47BA changed American aviation. The NTSB issued a series of urgent safety recommendations to the FAA in the aftermath. They called for improved crew training specifically focused on recognizing and responding to pressurization emergencies. They called for better cockpit warning systems that could help pilots distinguish between different types of alarms. They called for stricter oversight of charter aviation operators and their maintenance practices. Some of these recommendations had actually been made before, after previous accidents involving pressurization failures on smaller aircraft. They had not been acted on with the urgency they deserved. It took the death of one of America's most beloved athletes and 5 other people who also deserved to live to force those changes through pain. Stewart was 42 years old. He left behind his wife, Tracy, and 2 children, Chelsea and Aaron. His agent, Robert Fraley, who had guided his career for over a decade, was also gone. Van Arden, Bruce, Borland, Michael Kling, Stephanie Bellagarigue. 6 people who woke up on a clear October morning thinking it was just another day. At the Tour Championship that week, the tournament Payne Stewart had been flying to Dallas to prepare for players walk the course, wearing knickerbockers and Tamo Shanter caps in his honor. Flags at PGA Tour events flew at half-mast. The golf world and much of America stopped to grieve a man who had represented something genuinely good about the sport and about the country. 26 years have passed since that October morning. The field near Mena, South Dakota, where N4 7BA hit the ground, has long since been restored. The crater is gone. The wreckage was removed. Nature moved on the way. Nature always does, but the questions remain exactly where they were in the year 2000. What exactly failed on that jet? What was the specific mechanical event that caused the cabin to lose pressure on that particular flight, on that particular morning? Was it the valve adapter that attorneys argued about in court for years? Was it the bleed air system that had been repaired just 13 days earlier? Was it a door seal? A pressure fitting a component so thoroughly destroyed on impact that it could never be identified? Nobody knows. The NTSB does not know. The families do not know. And despite everything that modern aviation investigation can do, despite all the technology and science and analysis available to the finest accident investigators in the world, that question has never been answered. The exact cause remains officially undetermined to this day. What we know for certain is this. At 9:19 a.m. on October 25th, 1999, 6 people were alive and headed somewhere. At 9:27 a.m., they spoke their last words to the outside world without knowing those words were their last. Sometime in the minutes that followed, the air that was keeping them alive disappeared. And then the plane kept flying, because planes do not know when the people inside them are gone. It kept flying for 4 hours. It flew over families eating breakfast, and children going to school, and farmers working their fields, all of them completely unaware that a ghost was passing 14 miles above their heads. It flew until there was nothing.